Welcome to Debt Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Ripon Ray, and today we are discussing a pressing issue, council crisis and resilient funds. And what are they? And how do they work? And what they mean for communities experiencing financial hardship. As we approach the financial year beginning on 1st of April 2026, I'm joined by three expert guests to help us navigate this important subject. I have first Laura Stoker, Head of Tackling Poverty Team at Lambeth Council, Bajit Badisha, CEO of Nucleus Legal Advice, working in partnership with local citizens advice to support communities facing financial hardship, and finally, Gareth Evans, founder and director of award-winning Cash Perks, who specializes in cash-first approaches and financial inclusion solutions. So thank you for all for joining me today. So to understand the actual funds, let me dive into the subject matter with Laura Stoker from Lambeth Council. Laura, let me start with you. Local authorities offer discretionary payments to residents. We also have the Council Crisis and Resilience Funds. What is the purpose of each?
Resilience Fund is a fund given to local authorities by the Department of Work and Pensions. Previously, there was the Household Support Fund, which was about providing crisis support to residents in need, recognising the need as a part of the cost of living crisis and in response to that. However, there was also the discretionary housing payments as well that people could apply to help top up their rent when needed. The Crisis and Resilience Fund really takes both of those into account. So there will no longer be those schemes, and instead one big scheme for residents, both in order to help them with their immediate need around cash payments, also around kind of providing that financial resilience and a bit more holistic support to people, and being able to coordinate the voluntary sector and all the support that's going on within an area too.
Just to kind of recap, really, what are the differences and similarities between discretionary payments and crisis resilient funding?
So I think the discretionary payments were as it says on the tin, really discretionary. Not all local authorities were able to provide them or have been continuing to provide them. Really, the Crisis and Resilience Fund means that actually all the bits of funding local authorities were spending on a very discretionary basis before. It's a bit more standardised. It means local authorities will have an offer for people where, as you mentioned, there are some difficulties in funding where actually that means that some local authorities may not have had that discretionary offer available anymore.
Okay, and we also know that in the last, nearly a decade really, local councils themselves are far stretched and also facing severe budget pressures. How do these funding streams sit within already squeezed council budgets?
So I think these funding streams are so important for exactly that reason, really. It means that there is ring-fence funding that needs to be provided to those who are most in need. And I think with a lot of changes to council budgets, it's important that people continue to remember that there are people who are particularly financially vulnerable and need to be prioritised when changes are being made. And this grant really allows local authorities to be able to do that.
Just to kind of like capture on the words that you mentioned, ring-fence. How much flexibility do councils have in how they use the ring-fence fund?
So there are four elements of the fund that councils need to meet. One of those is around being able to provide crisis payments to residents. One being around providing housing payments, so what was previously discretionary housing payments. One being around providing resilience support, that could be through funding advice services or internal welfare advice. And then finally around voluntary and community sector coordination, making sure everyone in the borough is aware of the support available. Within those confines, there are some guidance that does need to be adhered to, and more information is publicly available as well on the DWP website. But there is a lot of flexibility within that, particularly looking at what that resilience support might be. In terms of the crisis payments particularly, we know that those have to be cash first predominantly as part of the scheme. And that is something actually we have adopted in Lambeth for a few years now and really welcome, as we know it means that communities are able to really shop where they want to. People know what is the best use of their own funds for a crisis. And also, so it ensures a level of cultural competency that isn't always there if people are being sent vouchers to a limited array of shops as well.
I mean, you've talked about a number of ways that you actually work, but how do council decide who receives support and what criteria and assessment that you use to support them?
There are a lot of schemes running at the moment to be able to support residents. And I would say one thing is that lots of those schemes are tailored for different people. So one thing I would recommend is if someone is feeling in or at risk of financial need, they speak to their local authority as soon as possible, because even if it doesn't appear on the surface, there is an offer. There might be one. In terms of the offers we have a whole host of data on residents that we know are potentially in or at risk of financial crisis, or that are currently claiming benefits, for example, and we would use that data to be able to target support to people that we know are in need, and also target the interventions we're providing to people where that makes a difference. So for example, we can tell if a family is a lone parent family, and what we would do to support those residents might be different from a pension aged family, for example. The other thing I would say as well is that it's not just that we are pushing out support to people, we also do have measures for people to be able to come in and self-refer. Some of those through our emergency support scheme, which is our cash first payment scheme, but also through getting in touch directly we have a team of financial link workers that people can get in touch directly with, whose roles are to help maximise residents' incomes, minimise their costs and build their financial resilience too.
Lovely, Laura. Now it's going broader now and working with stakeholders, and especially within the context of, let's say, partnership development. How do you work with third sector organizations to distribute funds effectively and reach most vulnerable communities?
We work very closely with a range of voluntary sector partners. We're really lucky to have such a big and thriving voluntary sector in Lambeth, particularly. So we meet regularly with partners, ensuring that they are involved in the design of how we're going to spend the Crisis and Resilience Fund, but also that we are meeting with people regularly to understand the needs of the people they are meeting and ensuring our interventions reflect those too. As I mentioned, a part of the Crisis and Resilience Fund is actually for voluntary and community sector coordination as well. So we'll be working really closely with partners there too around what they would like to see from that.
So now you've got the funds, you need to spend the funds, you prioritize funds whilst working with others. Now, in terms of, let's say, underspent, what happens when there is an underspent? Do you return it back to the central government, or do you spend it in other ways? How does that work?
I think fortunately we've not been in the position where we've had to worry about that up until now. How previously with the Household Support Fund, we would have to return those funds to central government if that had happened. With the new Crisis and Resilience Fund, there is the ability to roll over funds for the 3-year period that it runs for. And I think that is really positive, as well as it means people don't feel that they have to be spending money in quite a rushed way that they might do otherwise. It means we can be really considered about the approach we are giving, which is really positive.
And on a practical terms, Laura, what does the application and payment process generally look like for residents from your council's point of view?
So for our emergency support scheme, which is where our crisis payments currently come from, we have an application process that anyone can find online. Anyone with an income of less than £30,000 can access it. It's quite a lengthy form, and unfortunately that has to be the case in order to ensure we are providing the support that is limited to those that need it most. In terms of what payment looks like though, payment is very quick. We work with cash perks, and that then means we are able to issue payments to residents, and I'm sure Gareth will talk more about this, very quickly, directly, so they get QR code directly to their phones or email addresses.
Lovely. Thank you, Laura. I'm sure we'll come back to you anyway in terms of top tips. So let me go to Gareth, since Gareth's name has already been mentioned from Cash Perks. So Gareth, your work focuses on delivering payments directly to households in financial hardship. To begin, really, what need does your work aim to meet?
We know that millions of households in the UK face short-term financial crisis. So Trussell Trust, the food bank charity, estimates that there's about 14 million people, households in the UK that struggle to feed themselves or buy essentials. And that might be because of income shocks or unexpected expenses. And the traditional support used to be sometimes slow, complex, or restrictive, and often relied upon food aid or shopping vouchers. And from my perspective, getting cash support to households quickly, safely, and with dignity was essential. But there's a challenge there of getting cash to somebody. So lots of people, about 1 million people, don't have a bank account, and so that would be impossible. And secondly, if somebody is in a financial crisis, the chances are their bank account's going to be overdrawn. And so if we wanted to give some money for somebody to feed their children, put the heating on, flee domestic abuse, get into a night shelter, whatever the circumstance and the crisis we're trying to avert, if you put it into that bank account, it's just going to get eaten up. So Cash Perks, I developed this off the back of that challenge, basically, and we wanted to make it simpler for charities, housing associations, and councils to get that financial support into the hands of those who most need it.
I mean, you've heard what Laura said and describes how councils must allocate and distribute funds carefully. So how will Cashperk help council deliver these crisis funds?
So the Crisis and Resilience Fund is new. It's going to be 3 years. And it's really exciting that the government has actually listened to the campaigners, so Trussell and other councils, and designed this scheme really to address this problem. So firstly, cash first. So it's not cash only, but basically it should be provided in cash approach. And why is that important? So we've been arguing, and there's lots of evidence out there now that just cash gives that flexibility of support. Households know what is best to prioritize. Is it buying food? Is it putting the heating on? Is it travel? Is it expenses for their children? Is it debt, paying down some debt or paying rent? Cash provides that facility to do that. And it restores that dignity and that choice rather than restricting people to vouchers or goods. But all the evidence as well shows that it's the most cost effective. So again, Laura indicated some of this. People can eat that money out in a much better way, shop in more affordable, culturally appropriate places. And for councils, it reduces that administrative burden. So it's delivering it faster and at lower cost. But I think the other points is that the cash crisis funds is only a sticking plaster. But the beauty of this scheme, and I think the important bit to think about, is that it's combining that breathing space of giving that cash so that somebody can resolve that immediate financial crisis, buy food, put the heating on, whatever the situation is, but also use it as a gateway. You've built up trust with that resident, and then they're going to be more likely to engage in advice. They're more likely to complete an income maximisation check. They're going to sort of, speak to the council. They're going to engage in a lot more appropriate way. And then you're going to build that resilience. You're going to take that short-term response and build it into a longer-term support mechanism.
In terms of support mechanism, as you know, all councils in one way or another are very stretched because they themselves have to be very careful how much they spend and on what capacity. So to what extent, really, from a council's perspective, since they're overstretched, how cost effective is your model?
The beauty of what we're offering, it allows councils to directly align how they want to allocate those crisis funds. So they, as Laura spoke about, those 3 areas about the crisis payments, the support that they want to build, and also the coordination within the voluntary sector. They can allocate funds on that basis. And when as part of those crisis payments, they can allocate with cash perks the amount they want to distribute, and then their staff can log onto our system. It's really secure, and then instantly send between £10 and £500 to a resident in need. It's all instant. The resident receives a text message with all the credentials that they will need. And the most important bit about our solution is they can then instantly go to ATMs across the country and input without a card, without a bank account, no mobile app or anything. They can literally go to the ATM, type in the information that they've been given, and get that access to those funds that have been given to them 24/7 and totally for free. And so it takes away that need to pay money into a bank account, and it's immediate. So these councils are required to give these crisis funds within 48 hours of application. And so, we can resolve that challenge for councils.
Obviously, the solution is there, but in terms of, let's say, a wider market, no doubt, UK has a very strong, innovative systems and products and services that are out there. But within the context of that space, are there many similar providers like yours?
This challenge of getting cash to people that made me think there's got to be a better way to do this, because there was such limited options out there. So I was working with a big housing provider, designing an emergency food and fuel scheme for their residents. And it was that sort of research and involvement that made me realise cash is important, but it's a challenge to get it there. And so there are facilities that enable people to pick money up at shops, but that's not 24/7. It sometimes can be quite restrictive, and we know that a lot of shops don't carry as much cash nowadays. And so this solution sits within that ability to get cash instantly, 24/7, and somebody collect that money and resolve that immediate need. And so it's there as a facility specifically designed for getting those emergency welfare payments by councils, charities, and we work with a whole host of charities. So you'll hear from Balgit in a moment, and we work in Kensington and Chelsea with a partnership of local advice providers, and they can all disperse the funds and embed it within the support that's available.
Now, obviously, we talked about benefits. Gareth, you went on about how important the service is, but we also have to think about the flip side, the risks. What risks exist in the process of distributing such funds, whether it's financial, fraud, or even data security?
So we've built this to be secure in terms of the council being able to log on and securely sort of disperse this and make sure we mitigate any internal risks. And then for the resident collecting, all that eligibility and criteria checking is done by the council or the charity. And so we really are a secure payment facility that can send that payment to somebody, and we've built in place lots of internal controls to try and mitigate as much as possible. All the evidence from Cash First research shows that risk of misuse. So sometimes people think actually giving cash, people might spend it on booze, fags, all this type of stuff. But all the evidence shows that where that need is assessed, it's the criteria is met by the organisation. Giving cash is really effective, and that balance of efficiency versus the impact to the household is really there. And so, we're not going to minimise fraud altogether, but it's so minimal in terms of the balance of speed and efficiency versus the risk of misuse, really.
Now, who ultimately transfers the fund? Is it your organisation, the council, or a banking partner? How does that work?
Yeah, so it sits on the ATM system. We have our web-based portal that's secure for like Laura's team. I think they've got probably a dozen staff members that can log on, two-factor authentication, making sure that it's the right people being able to send it. they can raise those payments. They go instantly. And what the council has is a pre-funded account that is FCA regulated, that holds the council's money. And then those payments that are given to residents are ring fenced. And when they collect that money, the money is then automatically transferred from that pre-fund account to the ATM provider to cover that. And then what we do that it's completely free for any organisation who wants to come on board. So there's no upfront costs whatsoever, no onboarding, none of that. We also don't have any barriers to organisations using it. So there's no sort of regular monthly or annual subscription. The way our system works is there's a fee that's charged each time a resident collects, and it's based upon volumes. But it's really efficient in terms of and cost effective in terms of that. So we hope that it's a really simple system for both people picking up their money, but also for the organisations that want to get that money into the right hands.
Thank you, Gareth. Now moving on to actual frontline experience, we have Baljit Vidisha from Nucleus Legal Advice Centre based in West London. Baljit, your organisation works directly with residents facing financial pressures and often supports application for discretionary payments and moving forward for the crisis and resilient funds. Have you noticed, in a sense, of changes in how council responds to application for discretionary support?
Yeah, at Nucleus we work across West London. As Gareth mentioned, we've got a very good relationship with the council in RBKC. We've been delivering, working with them on the discretionary fund for a long time. And we work with a couple of the other councils and newer. So we've got quite a bit of experience on the discretionary fund, and it is discretionary. And that's what we've done over the last 10 years, as Laura mentioned earlier as well. It does mean the way it was designed deliberately by the then government was that each local authority identified what they thought were the priorities, how they wanted to tackle them, and it was really interesting working with a number of different councils. For example, in Hillingdon, they don't like cash first. They've got a huge cultural shock coming up the scene. Right? They're just not used to it. They're very conservative from that aspect. They're used to focusing on older people. They're used to supporting people in a very traditional way. So let's see what happens with that. Whereas someone like RBKC, again, very traditional, they took the approach. They could afford to do this, some people would say. They took the approach. They wanted to support people with council tax paying. Let's say they gave them 100% rebate, which was brilliant. It tackled poverty in a really easy way. Nice and simple. Gareth mentioned this before. Nice, simple way of reaching the people who needed it. That's what they did, the first thing. The other thing they did was they reached out to the voluntary sector. We reached out to them as well. And they devolved a lot. They just delegated some of the responsibility to us. So we decided what we thought were the priorities with them, alongside them, but we were active partners. It was held by KC Foundation, the money, and we worked with a number of partners. We gradually expanded as we learned and new partners wanted to join the scheme. And that was really good. It was about trying to get people cash perks. We used it all the time. We focused on fuel payments, and we changed as time went on. And the last one, which we worked very closely with the discretionary payments, was Ealing. Now, Ealing's in the middle somewhere there. They focused on fuel payments because fuel was a huge issue about 5 years ago, coming out of COVID. Small hardship payments. So they were interested in getting people back to work. So they were trying to nudge people back to there's some various theories of trying to get people to change their habits and so on. And the interesting thing was we were trying to learn from one and share with the other. And there was some cross-fertilization, but not much. And what we're hoping with all the consultation that's gone on with the new fund, with the 3-year fund, it's worth mentioning that councils only ever had 12-month funding at each time. So it's very stop-start. And it was sort of like, as Laura mentioned, it's thinking, are we going to spend this money? And how do we control it, the flow of money throughout the year, and waiting and not wanting to spend all your money before your new shock happened or something like that. So, so we've consulted with the local authorities, and it's amazing how much they are willing to learn now. They really want to learn. and there's this real focus on wanting to help local people tackle poverty and the people. And I think councils are very, very attuned to the needs of local people now. So let's see what happens. Every model has had its strengths, every model has had its weaknesses, and we're waiting to hear what happens in the next month or so, for the next few years.
I know you mentioned about different boroughs having kind of different flavour, but in terms of, let's say, the actual priorities, have you noticed things were stricter?
All the councils got a bit stricter, yeah, with the criteria to some extent. I think it was as they learnt, and they learnt to what the priorities were. They changed what they learnt what they thought, what they thought the priorities were to what they actually were. They started aligning their goals to different outcomes. It definitely got stricter in some senses. And I think what they also learned as well very quickly was the huge gaps that were opening up over the last 10 years as the welfare reforms kicked in. And there were big gaps in statutory provision for support for people, especially larger families, especially around housing. The gaps just grew and grew. And there's no way a local authority, trust as well, they can't fill those gaps that easily, even with discretionary payments, and trying to stop people falling. The gaps in the safety net were huge. So they did get stricter, definitely. Local authorities can't really address national issues in some ways, but I'd go back to the fact that the thing I really liked about it was they have engaged with the local communities. They've engaged with local voluntary sector, and the intention and the want to really solve local problems. I think that's come through the discretionary funds, and it has improved our relationship with the local authorities, I think.
Now, in terms of practicalities, at what point would you advise a household to apply for council assistance?
Pretty much like we would say for advice, as soon as possible. Right? The idea really is to get to know what the options are, get to know what the issues are, explore what the options are, and get help. There's a lot more help. We've mentioned the voluntary sector a little while ago. We've got across West London, there's so many good community groups, all wanting to help with so many different ways, different solutions. So it's really, we empower people through advice and information. So we want people to come to us. When someone comes to us early, we're able to give them options. We're able to look at prevention work as well. And they're able to have a greater say in what happens to their future. And plan for the future. That's what we want them to do.
So let's say on the application process, for example, even within some of the councils that you mentioned, let's say Kensington and Chelsea, what does the response typically look like?
As was mentioned earlier, it's usually an online form. You approach the local authority, fill a form in, you provide certain documentation. The form is long for most local authorities. I think councils do feel very responsible about spending public money, and there's a lot of, as we heard earlier, lots of talk about spending it in the wrong shops, on the wrong products and things like that. It's that control element and trust. So really, it tends to be conducting interviews and a decision hopefully comes out. We were discussing how it's changed over the last few years. Waiting times have gone up for some local authorities, believe it or not as they become more efficient, just because the sheer volume of people approaching them for help. And then they have shocks themselves as staff leave, as their cuts and so on. So it's not the best process in the world. And I would say RBKC, one of the ways they mitigated some of those negative impacts was bringing the voluntary sector in close. Now we are able to, they delegated some of the authorities to us, and we were able to pay out payments and so on. And with Cashworks, we were able to turn around, technically we could turn around a payment like we're having a conversation within 5-10 minutes if we'd made that decision. Yeah. Typically we did set up systems so we could do it within an hour or so, straight away. It was managers making decisions. We made that decision. The managers making decisions again to mitigate the risk, but also to protect staff, because what you don't want to do is have somebody there sort of say, yes, I'm going to give you money. No, I'm not, because it puts them in a vulnerable position, or it can do. But we did delay it for most people. We advertised we'd do it within 24 hours, but technically we could literally do it in minutes. We could And we could do it over the phone. That's the other exciting thing. If you found somebody couldn't make it to you because they didn't have the fare or they had another emergency they had to deal with, you could send that money literally over the phone there and then. You hear a ping on their phone and you know they've got that cash. And that's incredibly satisfying for the advisor and hugely powerful for the individual the other side, because you can hear the relief in their voice as soon as they've got it. They've got an answer and they'll go away and you will see them next day. 99 times out of 100, you will definitely see them next day to do that income expenditure we were talking about, to look at tackling those medium-term issues.
In terms of tackling medium-term issues, or even, let's say, short or long-term, you must have got sufficient data to really find out the actual cause of financial troubles for many that you advise.
We do like data, and we're trying to work with local authorities. Laura mentioned it, got loads of their local authorities, got lots and lots of data on individuals. They built it up, things like lift systems and so on. It's interesting what happens, the interactions and so on. I think we've got a lot to learn in the coming years about that. But the real reason is quite simple. People don't have enough money. That's the bottom line, really. Over the last decade or so, people's budgets, we always had people's budgets who weren't balancing. Increasingly, more and more people have got budgets that just don't balance. And no amount of, jiggling things around will solve that problem. So that's the biggest thing. And I've mentioned the welfare, the social security system and the safety net has got, threadbare, as people will say. So it's got harder and harder. One thing I would say is people on low income have always, and I've worked in the sector for a long time, they've always been very good at budgeting, very good at financial sort of like decisions and prioritizing money for their family, for their well-being and so on. Good at cooking, lots of them, some aren't, but that's skills we can tackle. But generally, they're really good at budgeting and planning and surviving on very little, making it go a long way. We've mentioned this before, it tends to be the unexpected, the income shocks where someone loses their job, or the expenditure shocks where suddenly there's a large bill comes in, or there's it's the typical one, the washing machine breaks, shoes go at the same time, a number of things. And in the last few years, it's been compounded by the cost of living, just the rents going up, certain basics going up, food, fuel, rent, all the things that everybody literally can't do. That disproportionately affects poorer people. On top of that, people have been getting not one or two shocks a year; they've been getting 3, 4, 5. Yeah, and no one can really survive that kind of build up without some kind of cushion that they've built up. So it's budgets that don't balance, and I think it's not controversial to say it's government policy that's led to a lot of people's budgets, especially on lower incomes, and the expensive housing, they aren't balancing.
You are coming from the advice sector, and no doubt sometimes resilient and crisis funds are not going to be sufficient. Or what other options available?
I think turning to the community is good. That does work because there's a lot of support in the community. And when you get advice from a local organisation, I think the first thing we can do is we can deal with the crisis first. Yeah. And then we can deal with putting the support in around the individual, around the family. So our approach is very, very simple. You deal with the crisis thing first. The presenting problem might not be the underlying issue, and we're very aware of that. We do benefit advice, we do debt advice and housing advice, so we deal with evictions and so on. So yes, but I do think what you have to address with respect for the individual, you have to respect the first issue they've got with, and at least answer it, if not tackle it. That's the first one you prioritise as far as tackling it. So if someone comes with a bill that might not be the main issue, you do address that. So the person's ready to deal with the underlying issue, and then you look at the real underlying issue. It could be unaffordability of housing. It could be there's an eviction coming up, and you need to tackle that. So when people come to us, it's quite standard, I think, within the advice set. The first thing you would do is deal with that crisis. Second thing, you look at to maximise the income. There's loads of tools out there. People are using those increasingly by themselves. Really good online tools about, entitled to, turn to us. There's a number of online ones. And councils are putting them on their own websites as well, which I think is really good, because that will allow them to work out where the local population, where their needs are, where the gaps are and things like that. It's that data issue that we were talking about, sort of knowing more information about locally. So it's maximising income, reducing outgoings where possible. It's not always possible, but reducing debt payments, again, that's a classic thing to make it more affordable across the board and prioritising certain payments and so on. We are really good at trying to access grants, one-off grants. That could be the discretionary grants local authorities have for white goods and so on. It could be grants for some furniture. They're getting harder and harder. There's benevolence funds. There's fuel grants that we administer ourselves. That's a really good quick win that can happen within a week or two. So we try and do that. And our goal is really to try and alleviate the crisis straight away, and then work with the person in the medium term to balance those budgets and get them on that even keel, and just get that budget, even if it's only about a couple of pounds, into surplus. And one of the other things that we do try and do, I think, within the voluntary sector is to try and work into that budget things that are important to the individual, because it is important for a decent quality of life to recognise you can't live on a pauper's budget all the time. You can't live on the standard financial statement budget where you're just paying for the essentials. You've got to build in there something which makes life valuable to that individual, whether that's presents for grandchildren is a typical one, or some people it's haircut, some people it's something that makes life respects their life decisions.
So moving towards policy, I guess, what policy challenges are currently having the most difficult impact in your communities, and what policy changes do you want to see?
I think the biggest issue for Londoners is housing costs, and the fact that there is a disconnect between how much you get for housing costs from the social security system and how much of a help you get compared to how much it actually costs. It is focused, the local housing allowance actually does direct you towards the bottom quarter to a third of the market. Tends to be the ones with the leakiest windows, the lack of insulation, the damp and so on. So it's high living costs. But that's the most you're going to get. So it is difficult, and lots of people do increasingly, and this is one of the reasons why they have negative budgets, increasingly are using money that's meant for ongoing costs to pay for housing costs. And quite sensibly, they make sensible decisions. You pay the rent first. That's what everybody always does. And we say that when people walk through the door, make sure you keep that roof over your head, because without that, there's no point paying some of the other bills. So I think that is the biggest issue. The bottom line is there isn't enough affordable housing. I don't think advice is going to resolve that, particularly, right, despite our best efforts. So the other policies that we can try and influence, I think, is really looking at some of the other policies which are pushing people further into debt. There's been some really good initiatives that have come out in the last 5 years. One of them is things like breathing space. That's been a brilliant game changer. It allows people to put a pause on any court procedures, any enforcement, and give them a time to seek advice and put something in place and move forward. And another great one was the debt relief orders, which is a simpler, quicker form of bankruptcy, which has made, again, been another game changer for our clients with the level of debts and the speed and what we can do, and the delegated authorities our advisors have to tackle that. But even with those areas, I think there's space there to make them work better. Look at the levels, look at the costs, see what you can include within a debt relief order and what you can't. Fines, those kind of things, they're excluded. Another big area, returning to housing again, is that you can write off rent arrears with the debt relief order. But the problem really, especially social landlords, if you do that, they will evict you. Yeah, and you can understand that in some ways. Yeah, they want the rent, but it doesn't help solve the problem that somebody who is, is going through a crisis, who is vulnerable, that you evict them afterwards when they try and solve their problem, try and get a fresh start. That's the whole point of a debt relief order. So I would like to see more policies, especially from social landlords, where there's a bit of forgiveness for debt, especially when they're seeking advice and they're looking to move forward. And they contribute towards it. I think that would be really good.
Thank you, Belgit. Before we close, so I'd like to go back to each of our panel members really to provide one top practical tip that could help individuals and families facing financial difficulties. So let me start with Laura. What would your top tip be?
Thanks. So my top tip, and I think Baljet did cover this slightly, would be if you are feeling like you might begin to start struggling financially, if you are feeling that pinch, but you're waiting because you think it's just not bad enough yet, that is bad enough to approach someone. I think it doesn't matter if that's your local authority or an advice service or anyone else, but have the conversation, because there is more support out there for you than you think there might be. And even if it's not a quick fix, there may be later support down the line by saying that you're in need.
Lovely. And to Gareth, what is your key advice?
So, building on Laura's point of reaching out for help, we've mentioned it a few times, but income maximization and benefit checking, I think this is a really valuable point. And people who don't think they're eligible, don't think their situation's bad enough, will be surprised that there's about 24 billion pounds every year that goes unclaimed in benefits and social tariffs. And so using one of those benefit calculators to input some of your details and see if you are missing out on hundreds, often thousands of pounds of money. So that would be my first place to start.
Lovely. And finally, Belgium, what your top tip would be for our listeners?
Okay. Building on the two other tips, which I think are very good tips, right? Get advice early and income maximization. It moves on to the next one, which is savings. I think one of the things we talk about is balanced budgets. It's great to have it tipped into a surplus. And what do you do with that surplus? Is to build those cushions. And I think it's really hard. And someone on a very low income, let's say means tested benefits, to put any money away. It's very, very difficult. It would be great. We try and encourage people to put a £5 away or something like that. But even then, you only get around about £250 at the end of the year. Top tip, I'm going to give two actually. One, join a credit union. Some really good credit unions out there. I was amazed about some of the products they've got. Things like they can give instant loans and things like that. You don't have to be with them a long time. And an interesting one, which I came across, was that you can use your child benefit income to get a loan, which I thought was a brilliant idea. It blew me out of the water, that one. That's, we're definitely going to tell our clients about that if they can. And so they get used to you getting credit from a reputable source, which is manageable, rather than from an unreputable source, like, all the way down to sharks and loan sharks and so on. But my tip that I was really going to say was that going back to that £5 a week, it's really difficult. It's hard to keep up payments on a low income. I think there should be a reward for keeping up savings over a long period of time, whether it's half a year, I don't know. I've come across lifetime ISAs recently, where certainly same for a house, the government will put in £1,000 if you put in a certain amount and so on. Why can't we do that for people on universal credit? If you build up a £5 a week, they can, and you build up £250 at the end of the year, it gets matched by the government, and they put in £250 as well. And that can be ring fenced or whatever for long-term students. I don't know, but that would help cope with shocks and things like that, because I think that's the big difference between people on low income and people who are managing. It's being able to cope with those shocks.
I'm incredibly grateful to my panel members for sharing their expertise on such a complex and no doubt evolving issue. Council Crisis and Resilience Fund sits at the intersection of national policy, local authority pressures, and no doubt lived reality of households struggling to make ends meet. It's clear that partnership, transparency, and no doubt innovation will continue to be essential in this sector. In our next episode, we'll be exploring the cost of wars and our living standard, especially as the sector faces continued funding cuts and increasing demand. Thank you for listening to Debt Talk Podcast. Until next time, take care.